You're listening to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor, powered by bbbgive.org. Here we explore the motivations that form the basis of giving and service. We inspire generosity and celebrate the transformative effects that giving and service have on the human spirit and on community. The conversations featured on the podcast also uncover giving strategies that educate and provide tools to help listeners make impactful gifts of both their time and money. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the Heart of Giving podcast, powered by bbbgive.org. Give.org is the nation's standards-based charity evaluator and your one-stop source for information on giving and reports on the most asked about charities. I'm Art Taylor, your host. And with me today is someone who can best be described as an innovator and entrepreneur. But she has had her life intersect with social good by volunteering her time and skills, donating her money, and through her business ventures. Dr. Joan Fallon is the founder and CEO of Curemark, and she is considered a visionary scientist who has dedicated her life to championing the health and well-being of children worldwide. She is widely recognized for her passion and innovation in defining a successful entrepreneurial venture. Curemark is a biopharmaceutical company focused on the development of novel therapies to treat serious diseases for which there are limited treatment options. The company's pipeline includes a phase 3 clinical stage research program for autism, as well as programs focused on Parkinson's disease, schizophrenia, and addiction. Curemark will commence the filing of a biomedical drug application for the first novel drug for autism under the FDA Fast Track program. Fast Track status is a designation given only to investigational new drugs that are intended to treat serious or life-threatening conditions and that have been demonstrated to have the potential to address unmet medical needs. Dr. Fallon holds over 300 patents worldwide. She's written numerous scholarly articles and lectured extensively across the globe on pediatric developmental problems. A former assistant professor at Yeshiva University in the Department of Natural Sciences and Mathematics, she holds appointments also as a senior advisor to the Henry Crown Fellows at the Aspen Institute, as well as a distinguished fellow at the Athena Center for Leadership Studies at Barnard College. She's also a member of the Board of Trustees of Franklin and Marshall College and the Pratt Institute. She serves as a board member at the Dream Charter School in Harlem. The Pitchin Foundation, started by Cece and Amber Sabathia, Springboard Enterprises, an internationally known venture catalyst that supports women-led growth companies, and Vote Run Lead, a bipartisan not-for-profit that encourages women on both sides of the aisle to run for elected office. She served on the ADA Board of Advisors for the building of the new Yankee Stadium and has testified before Congress on matters of business and patents. Joan is the recipient of numerous awards, including being named recently one of the 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs of 2020 by Goldman Sachs. And in 2017, she was EY Entrepreneur of the Year, New York in healthcare, and received the Creative Entrepreneurship Award from the New York Hall of Sciences in 2018. She's a bachelor's degree from Franklin and Marshall College, a doctorate from Palmer University, and has completed her coursework for a master's in science and clinical investigation from Harvard University's joint program with the institutes at Massachusetts General Hospital. Joan, it's a great pleasure for me to have you with me today.
I'm honored to be here, Art, and to be able to be part of this phenomenal podcast series.
Well, Joan, let's get into it a bit. Your life has touched philanthropy in a wide variety of ways. Everything from how you do your business to how you volunteer your time. Was this something that you planned, or is it more, I guess, serendipity, or just how circumstances came about?
Thank you. That's a great question, Art. I think that since I was a young child, I had three loves. They were medicine, children, and baseball, or actually anything with a ball. And my favorite gift of all time was I was 10 years old and my cousin was in medical school and he brought me a real stethoscope. And it was a treasure, that I've had my whole life because I just always had those loves. And as my life, was a journey, as all of our lives are, I was able to intertwine all of those things together in a way I could never have dreamt about, either as a child or even as a young adult. I was always an athlete. If I was born at a different time, I probably would have been a professional athlete. But I have been able to be a part of sports, professional sports, on the philanthropic side, as advisors like for the ADA for the new Yankee Stadium in 2009. And I've been very blessed that I've been able to put those things all together, including in my main work today, which is in my biotech company, which is working in autism. And we do a lot of philanthropic work around autism, as well as a lot of other issues such as education. Like you mentioned, the Dream School, a charter school in New York that was founded around baseball. It was founded by a group of individuals who fixed a sandlot to allow children to play baseball in East Harlem. And it grew and grew and grew. And now, Major League Baseball, the Yankees, the Mets are all represented on the board and a part of the organization. And it serves a tremendous need in East Harlem between the schools, the elementary, middle, and high schools, as well as the sports teams that they sponsor.
Joan, I hear so many people say to me, I wish I could do more philanthropically, or I wish I could give more of my time, but my job seems to be in the way. Or they think that only people who are actually working in philanthropy can actually have an impact. I can see how you've proven that wrong, but what would you say to those people, Joan?
So I think that, every person has an individual set of circumstances. But if you take, for example, individuals who are working on projects, like an entrepreneur, for example, everyone thinks that you have to be focused, 150% of the time that you're working on your project. But what I've learned, and it's since been, borne out from other sources, is that when you look slightly away from what you're doing, you have a better vista from which to learn from. And I have to say that I have learned so much from being on these boards or working at a walk, for example, or participating in a walk. Those experiences are very important to your main job. And so I think that if you have the opportunity to participate, and participation comes in many forms, right? It can be financial participation, it can be time, it can be expertise. Those things are really valuable to each individual because it enables you to learn something, to look at different perspectives, to have the diversity of opinion coming into your life. It enriches what you're doing as a person and also in your work.
Amen to that. And I wish that many people who don't really see themselves as philanthropists because maybe they're working in business or industry, or as you say, they have a project going, would potentially see that they can add so much just by giving a little bit of their time. Joan, obviously, autism is something that is central to your life. Tell me a little bit about what you're doing with autism, what hope you have for solving this really challenging problem that many families and people have. Where are we right now, Joan, with autism in America and in the world?
So, when I first started seeing autistic children in my practice, it was the late 80s, early 90s. And that's sort of when the explosion art began. So, you started seeing more and more children. And, some people say, well, it's because we have better diagnosis. Well, we do have better diagnosis, but I rarely give a talk anywhere where, the entire audience, when I ask them, do you know someone who has autism? They raise their hands, the whole audience. So everyone is touched by autism today. And while I thought it was very much a US issue and, an EU issue, as I've traveled the globe, it's a global issue. There are high numbers in China, in India, in South America, in Africa. It seems to be everywhere. And we know very little about what causes it. They say that when you've seen one child with autism, you've seen one child with autism. And so the symptoms are very child to child, but they fall in, major categories that are part of the diagnosis. So we're not very far along in our understanding nor in treatments. And so we've been working on a treatment, not a cure, but a treatment for autism now. I've been working on it over 20 years. Our company's been around for like 12 or 13 years now. And we've run clinical trials and we hope to, submit next year for our approval. But I think that part of our focus, it's twofold. One is to actually get something that especially very young children can benefit from. And the other is to show that these kids are worth investing in
Mm,
because if you don't know what causes the problem and there's nothing else really approved for the core symptoms, why would a company actually pursue it?
mm,
So we're hoping that when we get an approval, it will spur others on to actually want to do more looking. And like many conditions that we have, especially neuropsychiatric ones and other ones, there's more than one treatment for them. So like for depression, there's more than one treatment. And so I think that we hopefully will be the first out there and that it will spur on other people to start to look and dig deeply for these kids because what I have learned through these many years is that there's more money invested are in diseases that hit adults that cause degenerative conditions like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and other things than there are in diseases that hit in childhood that result in children not developing. And so we need to bring awareness to that. So my hope is that by doing what we're doing, is that all those things can happen and it will be a catalyst for just so much more. Will also be, if not the first, nearly the first gut brain kind of drug approved.
mm.
And that's another paradigm that hasn't been looked at, although it's out there now. And Mayo Clinic came out with a study, I think just this week, talking about the gut and antibiotics maybe having some role, the gut in, lung disease and COPD. There's other research out. So we haven't looked there before. And so we've been a pioneer. When we started this, it was hard because no one was looking there. And now, of course, it's more mainstream and more people are looking there.
But Joan, you made a great point. I mean, not many, I would say, pharmaceutical companies would invest the way you have in something like this. What was it that drove you in this direction?
So I was really happy doing what I was doing, seeing children every day in my practice. But when I discovered that there's this deficiency in these kids and maybe replacing some enzymes could help them, I came to a crossroad or a fork in the road, as they say, right? And I wish I could be like Yogi Bear that said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah.
But I couldn't quite do that. So I had to make a choice. And I chose to go in the direction of pursuing this treatment for the kids. And so I invested virtually everything I had financially, et cetera. I went back to work to do some coursework in clinical investigation and decided that I can help X number of kids in my practice, but maybe I can help millions of kids if there's something here. And so it was a very purposeful choice. I don't know that I ever wanted to be a biotech company. I used to say I went into biotech kicking and screaming
Mm.
because it wasn't the side of healthcare that I was familiar with. But I'm very, very glad that I did this, very grateful that I've had the opportunity, that people have backed our company in order to get where we are. And so, I took one of those tines of the fork and went down this road.
Well, I wish you tremendous success with your next stage of this. Obviously, the potential here is to help, as you say, millions of kids. And, for purposes of this podcast, this is another example of how people can give back through their work. You took a significant risk, it seems to me, dropping everything to pick up something that you had virtually no assurance would succeed. And yet you had this belief. And I have to tell you, Joan, I don't know where this comes from in some people, how people can just drop everything they're doing and get so smitten or so taken or so moved by something going on in the world that they see no other option but to do it. I am just amazed by people like you who are able to do that and who are not only willing but compelled to do it. So thank you for that. And do you see something like unusual in yourself? I mean, maybe this goes to your entrepreneurial spirit, so to speak. I know entrepreneurs are people who are willing to take risks. Is there something in your DNA that would say, Joan, you have to find something really risky to do and jump out there and do it?
That's a really great question. So I think it has a couple of answers. So I've been driven, as I said earlier, by those three loves: medicine, baseball, and children. And so when it comes to helping children, to me, there's just no bounds, right? That's what I've always felt.
Mm,
And both my brother and I have both been entrepreneurs. And someone asked me how it is that two siblings can be entrepreneurs in completely different areas. I mean, he's an electrical engineer, an aerospace guy. I mean, this is what he did. He did it as a very young man. I did it much older. And I think part of that could be twofold. One is that both things that my brother did and what I did were driven by science. So I had scientific lab testing that showed what I had found was real.
hmm
And then that got parlayed into a patent. And so I had that to start with. That was the foundation of saying, okay, I can leave where I am and going on. Both of my parents, or both of our parents, were big lines underwriters. My dad for AIG and Lloyd's of London, my mom for Travelers and then Citigroup. And they always taught us that risk was something that you managed. It's not something you stayed away from.
Fascinating.
It's really important for people to understand the difference between taking a risk and managing a risk. So you take a risk, yes, but how it's managed, I think, makes it either successful or not. And while you can't always control everything, it's about understanding what's in front of you, what kind of things you're going to face, being able to look at what comes up because things always come up. And I always tell my team, I said, if something comes up that goes south, if we discuss it and we know about it and you share it and we look at it, it's an issue. If you don't share it and then it becomes, a surprise down the road, even though you knew it, but you were waiting, it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
So anticipating risk and anticipating what can happen or understanding that Stuff will happen that's uncertain. You manage it. And then it doesn't seem so overwhelmingly risky. I put my whole savings, my retirement, all that online. That's a risk. But it was a risk I took. But managing that risk is really important.
Well, any mission based work involves taking risk. And, we're in our sector, in the nonprofit sector, where I spent most of my life, organizations are charged to address really big and intractable problems. And sometimes we can get caught, I think, between building and maintaining an institution versus really going after the goal, which is to eradicate a problem. Most try to do both, but many times I think the balance can be less focused on really solving the problem sometimes rather than, keeping sort of the business afloat. And, that's understandable, I guess. People need to make a living. The problems are usually long term in their solutions. So maintaining an organization is important. But I wonder sometimes if we don't go for the goal sometimes not enough. Maybe we should be more focused on, putting all the money, so to speak, on black. If we have really good ideas and we believe in what we're doing, and if we fail, then we fail, but we're not going to just continue an organization that has no ability to solve a problem. What's your thought about how we balance actually going for it full force versus maintaining an institution that might achieve it over time?
Well, I think part of that may be able to be answered in the metrics that are used to measure what successful philanthropy is all about. And so I think that some big philanthropic organizations have found that they've put money in places where they weren't solving problems. They were solving perceived problems, but they weren't actual problems. And that's really what leadership is about, right? Leadership is about solving problems. And so if you just maintain the status quo in your organization and you give the same amount of money to every group and you don't innovate, you don't back innovators, you don't look at what's new and coming, in sort of your area. And if you just maintain where you are, then things will pass you by. You won't become as relevant as you could be with the money that you're investing from your organization. I think that philanthropic organizations need to look at their investment in whether it's individuals or whether it's groups, whoever it is, like it's a for profit company. And to understand that for profit companies need to move forward, they need to scale, they need to have a return on their investment. Sometimes I think if philanthropic organizations operated that way, they'd be more efficient and they would actually be backing things that are more innovative and solve more problems. But that's just my own opinion from looking at around at what I'm involved in.
Yeah, and many nonprofits have real challenges with innovation, primarily because of resources. So many organizations are just strapped for resources. And I think you and I would agree that one way to deal with the resource issue is to collaborate more. What's your sense of how and whether nonprofits should collaborate and under what circumstances?
So I think that public private partnerships are terrific. I think when they work well, they really work well. I think we've had some of those at the Dream School with the City of New York. They've worked really well. The school has taken property that was abandoned, overgrown, and built baseball fields and built schools and did all kinds of amazing things with the public private partnerships. But it takes both sides to be interested and to really want to move that forward. I think collaboration is important because you don't know what's going on in the rest of the world if you're not talking to other organizations, you're not looking in other places. And I think it's really important to do that so that you can have the most up to date, the best value in terms of whatever you are, giving money to. And I think that in looking at the fiduciary duty of the organization, of the board members, and how that money is spent needs to be very well explained to donors. So I think if donors understood that maybe some of this money would be more risky because you're going to back other innovative groups, that would be important. I think that President Obama took some heat for some of the things he backed in the climate space sector. That didn't pan out, but that's what happens when you invest in things that are cutting edge and changing. So I think the right public private partnerships, I think the right collaboration between philanthropic organizations, which is not, you don't see a lot of that, but I think more of that would be really, really helpful.
Joan, your philanthropy and volunteerism has really focused in on education at almost every level. You mentioned your work that you do with Pratt Institute, the work you're doing at Franklin and Marshall College. You've been involved at Barnard. It seems that so much of your volunteer time has been spent in the education space as a volunteer. What have you learned about the potential for education and the challenges of education from, I would say, K throughout college?
So I think education is a platform, it's a springboard to the future. And actually, at each one of these organizations, there's a level of education that goes on. So, for example, at Vote Run Lead, which is the bipartisan organization trying to get more women to run for office, they do a lot of education. They teach women how to run for office. What are the things you need? How do you get the signatures you need to get on the ballot? All of those pieces. And they run that throughout the country. And indeed, they've helped a lot of women get elected over the last couple of years. I think that the schools, of course, are, like the Dream School or Pratt, Franklin and Marshall. They're all about taking young minds and molding them, right, into be the best person that they can be. And I think that's really what you want to have. I mean, I grew up with the philosophy from my parents that you can do anything you want to do. So whether that was my father taking me to little league practice and fighting with them that, she's better than anyone else out there, why can't she play? Right? To, when I said I wanted to play the piano when I was 5, they said, okay, we'll get you a piano, but it's going to be a used piano. And if you stay with it, we'll get you any piano you like. And they did. They followed through. So I think that having the knowledge that anything is possible and then being able to educate someone and opening their minds. Springboard Enterprises, it's about women who know nothing about entrepreneurship and being able to help them with the basics of entrepreneurship. These are the places where education is really important. And it doesn't begin at kindergarten and end at college. It goes on and on. The Pitch In Foundation. I mean, Cece and Amber do amazing things. They build baseball fields all around the country. They give clinics, they talk to kids, they encourage them. And so those are, that's our future. And so being able to put energy into that for me is really, really important.
Joan, I know you spend a lot of time thinking about the future of education, and you're also quite the technologist. What are some of the opportunities for education and tech to intersect to produce better results for young people going through the educational process?
Well, first of all, we had to make a very quick switch in the spring to using a lot of technology from which to teach and learn. We were very unprepared for that. There are some institutions that were using online technology to deliver courses. A lot of adult education or executive education is done that way by big institutions. but we were not ready for that. And I also think that the education, the technology education, even at a basic level, like how do you navigate your laptop or your iPad or whatever, is an important thing to teach individuals at a young age, because otherwise it's kind of a haphazard learning. So someone's uncle taught them how to do this, someone's parent taught them how to do that, they learned this in school or that in school. But I see it as a double-edged sword. So I see the loss on some level of the interaction, the human interaction in learning. But I also see that it's potentially can be more equitable. So, for example, when the Dream School went immediately remote in the spring, there were children that didn't have devices from which to get on their Zooms. So the school made sure that every child had a device. Because even if there's a device at home, there then may have been 3 youngsters having to share that device. So, and then there's internet. Not every child had internet at their home. There's a picture of a young person sitting outside the New York Public Library, which was closed, but the internet was still there, having to get on to learn. So I think that having that learning be more standardized, having it be more equitably distributed is important, and also can be a tool from which to give more people education. But we can't let it be a hindrance either. And that's true, I'm talking about New York City, but there are rural areas in this country that do not have internet access. So, what happens to those individuals who aren't going to school? And so, I think that we have an opportunity to bring more learning to people through technology at some loss of the in person piece. But I do think we can switch it some. I think that the in person piece can be more intensive, and bringing students back for 2 weeks at a time where they're spending time with small cohorts, kind of morning, noon, and night, may give them a different kind of learning. I mean, some of the most important things that I learned when I was, for example, in college were the internships that I had, the time that I spent immersed in something. So I think we have to start to look at things a different way, Art. I think we have to begin to think of it not as a 9 to 5 or 9 to 3 or, semester to semester. We have to begin to look at it in a very different way. At the same time, making sure that it's equitable and distributed properly.
Well, you and I had this wonderful opportunity to be educated at one of the most selective liberal arts colleges in the country, Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And I think you would agree that we were so blessed to be able to attend Franklin and Marshall and to be part of small classes that gave us the opportunity to get to know our faculty members and work alongside of them. This form of education has really transformed lots of people, my life certainly. I do wonder, though, and I know you follow this too, whether this model of education will be able to survive given the challenges we have with the price associated with going to an institution like that, and what will happen to our society if we aren't able to do it, and how do we assure, Joan, that institutions like Franklin and Marshall and others will be with us for the decades and millenniums to come?
So, I mean, I think that I've always kind of looked at different models of education. Being a student of it, I think, is important. And, there's a program that Johns Hopkins administers to young people, for young people, called CTY. And I know many students, young people who went to those programs, and they're very selective. You have to take entrance tests, but the memories and the learning that took place in small cohorts in intensive ways is very memorable to those individuals. In some cases, one young woman I know took her CTY course actually at Franklin and Marshall,
Wow.
and it had to do with the history of medicine. And she actually remembers that. It's something that stuck with her because of the innovative professor that happened to be an F&M professor, but also the intensity and the interaction with others. It wasn't a whole semester, right? It wasn't a very long period of time. But I do think those experiential things, even in shorter time frames, it can be really, really valuable. And I think we have to reimagine it in a different way. And while there are certain types of class hours and things like that, those things are going to have to change. How we actually give a college degree or degrees at all, I think have to have a different metric to them. I mean, there'll always be people who want to do it the way it's always been done, right? That's just how that works. But I do think that having experiential time, which is associated with the deep rigor of the academics, they're together. I think those things are really valuable. And I see that as a future way of educating young people as we go forward.
Joan, what do you think philanthropy's role is in helping us bridge a very divided country?
So I think it's a great question, and I think it could have a great role, but it has to get out of its own way.
Mm.
Philanthropy sometimes gets in its own way. And if you're going to look at talent, talent is all over, everywhere. The old cliche, talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. Well, I think philanthropy has the ability to bridge that divide, but it has to look at talent by a different metric. We look at talent by a metric that we've always looked at talent at, but I think talent has a lot of different metrics.
Mm.
And being able to mine for that talent, whether that's in the arts or in music or in, biology or whatever it's in, may not be measured by the classic metrics that we use, whether that's an SAT or whether it's this or whether it's grades or whatever. We will miss talent if we don't change how we look at it. And I think that we have to change how we look at it, and we have to change where we go to find it.
Well, you're making me think a lot about our challenge today with bringing greater diversity, equity, and inclusion to the mainstream. And we've had some time, you and I, to talk about this. But how do you see our nation just accepting the, I would say, great opportunity before us? I read a study recently that showed that the nation is actually losing GDP because of its unwillingness to grapple and bring parity to people based on race. And there's so much more opportunity for all to benefit from this, from creating a more just and equitable society. How do we just get people to accept these truths and begin to move forward? And again, do you see a role in this for philanthropy?
I really do, Art. And I think it's one of the ways that we can sort of dig out of this kind of lack of equity mess that we're in. And it dates back when I testified in front of Congress, not last summer, the summer before. I talked about the lack of women and individuals of color who hold patents. The numbers are abominable. So, and these are a little bit dated, but for example, with women, I think it was like, I don't know, 8% of women were the primary patent holders of patents, and half of those were in fashion and those kinds of things, not in science. And then I think 18% of all patents that had at least one woman on it. Those are terrible numbers. Why? Is it women are not that inventive? Like women are not that innovative? Like I don't think that that's true. It's the same for individuals of color. And I think we have to break down sort of the elitism that believes that only these people can patent things. Only this science group can do this. Only this institution has these kinds of innovative scholars. None of that's true. It just isn't true. And if they're aggregated, it's an artificial aggregation. So I think that philanthropy needs to sort of dig underneath this and figure out why is this? And then get individuals, whether those are patent lawyers and finances and all of those things behind finding out where people are innovating.
Yeah.
Because they're not just innovating at higher ed institutions, they're innovating everywhere. And they might be innovating and no one even knows they're innovating. We got to go find them, find out what they're thinking, understand where their heads are. These young people have all kinds of ideas. We just need to know that they're there and help them make it to be something.
Do we have reason to be optimistic over the next, I would say, decade, and why?
So I think that more of these issues are in the forefront, right? And I think that as we confront them, we can then deal with them and help solve them. But we can't do it on the surface. Sometimes money is thrown from philanthropic organizations at the surface. We just need more women who are patent holders. We just need more people of color. So let's go find people of color and make them patent holders. That's not how it's done. We need to understand why that is and feed it from the bottom up.
Hmm.
And that may not produce a metric immediately.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be able to show that we put this money here and we did this in 2 years or a year. It may take 5 years. But organizations need to be willing to do that and dig and solve problems and move it forward.
Well, Joan, listen, you are just a treasure. You're a treasure. It's been one of my life's pleasures to have this friendship and collegiality with you for, I guess now, probably 10, 12 years. It's been a real joy to my life to have made this acquaintance with you. And this is another, I think, benefit people get from volunteering. I would not have known Joan Fallon had it not been for our willingness to volunteer. And we've become, now colleagues and friends, and we've shared ideas and we've commiserated over challenges and we've found solutions together. None of this would have happened but for our willingness to volunteer. This is another, I think, benefit to people who are still wondering whether or not they should be getting out of their jobs or whatever it is they're doing and spending some time in a philanthropic endeavor, giving back. And I'm sure you can say the real advantage to you and all the people you've met, all the things that you've been able to do and relationships that you've been able to achieve and connections you've been able to make with people to people just by volunteering and giving your time. So what would you have to say in closing, Joan, to inspire someone who is, they're sitting at home trying to wonder, I got all this going on. Do I make some time to support a cause in any particular way? What is your closing argument to that individual, Joan?
So I think I'm going to put this in terms of money, but it's not about money, right? But in terms of riches, if you give $10 of your time, you're going to get 50 back because of what you've experienced, what you've gotten back from people who are in that space with you is so much richer than what you went into that moment with. And I have to say that about every single encounter I have, whether that's a Zoom meeting or whether that's on the ground with someone out in the world, I always get more back than I give. Always. And I think that people need to look at it that way, that it will enhance their personal life, their relationships with their family. It will help their business life, their work life, because they're richer because of what they received while they were doing that volunteer work. while they were doing their philanthropy. And so to be afraid of it, or to be shy, or to be thinking that what you're giving is not enough, what you're giving adds up over time. You give a little, someone else gives a little, and then it becomes a lot. But you will get way more back than you give.
Well, what a great message, Joan. And I can't, again, thank you enough for joining me for this edition of the Heart of Giving podcast. I'm Art Taylor. I thank all of you for listening, and I hope you'll subscribe to our show on all the major podcast platforms. Please join us for our next episode.
You've just listened to the Heart of Giving podcast with Art Taylor. Be sure to tune in next time for a brand new episode. To listen to our other interviews, visit heartgiving.podbean.com. That's heartgiving.podbean.com. Subscribe to our show on major podcast platforms. Send your comments and ideas to nona@thusmarket.com. That's nona@thusmarket.com. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Podbean's terms of service.